Beep, 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 beep. Hey up, peeps. Let's get you in the right order. Hey, how are we? Got a bit of tea here. Nice cup of tea. Swigging it. Right, swigging it. Just a little bit. Right, so let's have a look at this. We're going down under. There's there's a rather sad, but quite frankly, very predictable situation developing in Australia. And I've got an article here that was sent to me from one of my warrior teachers about a hospital at the centre of a real battle over what has been known as gender affirming care and what we now know to be an iatrogenic train that harms children and young people. It's a very difficult situation because it involves children. And that's, I think, where half the problem is, who are unfortunately pawns in a battle between ideology and science and reason. So I'm going to go through it with you. It's from abc.net.au. I've got another article which does a similar thing from The Guardian, but this should give you a flavour of what exactly is going on. And there was a programme shown on television in Australia the other day which has divided people extraordinarily. I mean, and I think that's a sign that Australia is moving in what I believe to be the right direction. A clinic at a leading Sydney hospital has become embroiled in a war over how to help kids in distress about their gender, grinding services for the new patients to a halt as waiting lists blow out. Now, that's a very interesting first article, not least of all because it says how to help kids in distress about their gender. Well, you just need the words how to help kids in distress. It can't be about their gender, because gender is something that's not able to cause distress. It is just a thing that you either choose to or choose not to obey. Their confusion will be about something else. We know that from the book by Hannah Barnes, and not only that, the research that's come out previous to that and things that have been looked at by many other groups such as Sex Matters and Transgender Trend, that the problem we've got is that this idea of gender being intruded into upon the thoughts of young people is in fact usually the, if you will, tip of a particularly vicious sword, in that there will be other issues such as ADHD, abuse, or other areas of confusion or distress in the child's mind. So even that first paragraph is to me problematic in that it posits gender as a primary reason for the problems that we're seeing, when my argument would be that it's very unlikely to be primary. It's probably tertiary at best and is a result of some other kind of trauma. Only 3 new patients have been seen at Westmead Children's Hospital's gender clinic this year due to a lack of staff and a string of resignations. It's all sounding rather Tavistock, isn't it? Already. Last year they saw 88 new patients. So what we're seeing here is, I think, again, ROGD, the rapid onset gender dysphoria, the social contagion, and of course the Transhausen mothers and fathers, the Transhausen parents, for whom the idea of having a child that identifies as something they're not seems to be chic with some of the chattering classes. Some staff have left following the publication of controversial research endorsed by the hospital hierarchy. The research was initiated in 2013, and current frontline staff from the gender unit were not involved. The gender unit, it shouldn't even be called that. The research is being weaponised, here we go, by anti-trans activists and proponents of alternative forms of gender care. Right, the research is being weaponised by anti-trans activists. What are they weaponising? Some facts, or are they weaponising? What are they weaponising? Let's continue. The clash of science, research and ideology is part of a polarising and sometimes toxic debate over the gender affirmation model that's playing out around the world. That's playing out around the world. The language makes me sick. That's playing out around the world. Gender affirming care can include puberty blockers to suppress puberty for young people distressed by their changing body. Let's be clear. Puberty blockers, when used as part of a gender affirming care package, are harmful. They do not, as it says here, they do not suppress puberty. They disrupt puberty, and that's a massively different thing. To the extent where, for example, by the time somebody hits 16, their penis will be so small they have to rip the skin from their arm in order to make the pork tube that they pretend is a penis. Gender affirming care. Sorry, I'm the other way around. They have to take the skin off the arm to make the pretend vagina. In the case of women, they tend to have to use skin off the arm to make a penis. The whole thing's just Frankenstein. Gender affirming care can include puberty blockers, as I said. In some cases, this is followed by cross-sex hormones. In some, we know it's not some, it's most. In most cases, and of course, it's gay children and lesbian children that are having this done to them. So we know that that's a fact. In some cases, this is followed by cross-sex hormones to allow people to transition into the gender they identify with. Gender identifying, so this is the gender I identify with, therefore I have a gender identity. That's what this article is saying. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. It's a euphemism for I'm mentally ill or mentally confused or terribly unwell. It's a euphemism. Transgender health expert Sam Winter, who works in the School of Population Health at Curtin University, argues this model of care is now under existential threat. I do hope so. I do hope so, Mr. Curtin. I'd like to see this whole issue closed. Stop it. Right? It's getting rather nasty, Winter said. It's getting rather nasty, or you think that putting children on puberty blockers and then, whipping off their breasts to begin with, sticking them on some cross-sex hormones, taking off their breast, and then, completely removing their genitals and messing with their sexuality and their sex isn't nasty? It's getting rather nasty? No, Mr. Curtin, it is nasty. From its very root to the top of the tallest branch. It's nasty. Homophobic, nasty. Anna resigned late last year after working for 6 months as a clinical psychologist at the Westmead Gender Clinic. She says she didn't feel supported by hospital hierarchy to provide gender-affirming care. There's a picture of Anna. I'll leave you to have a look. Gender-affirming care. The Gender Clinic's core team was incredibly gender-affirming and supportive, but it felt like everyone else was doing the bare minimum. Anna told Four Corners, which I believe was the programme. Everybody else was doing the bare minimum. I imagine they were doing the bare minimum so that they hurt as few people as possible, but didn't get themselves fired by the acolytes and adherents that would be running the show if you're using gender-affirming care. I think one of the main issues was the long wait list, the lack of staff. Our model of care was being developed to become a better, improved model of care, but it was never finalised. No action was ever taken with that. We were told that we had received funding for more staff, which would have been fantastic. But while I was there was nothing, no change. Same huge wait list. Somebody's stopping this train somewhere by the sound of it. I wonder who that is. In December last year, Westmead had just 145 patients on its book, compared with 1,095 patients at Melbourne's Gender Clinic and 922 patients at Queensland's Gender Service. Westmead Clinic now has 115 patients on its waiting list. Sydney Children's Hospital Network, which oversees Westmead, said it continues to provide holistic, culturally safe and affirming care to current patients. What do you mean by culturally safe? What do you mean by culturally safe? I don't even know what that means. Culturally safe? What do you mean? Somebody should explain that to me because I don't understand it. Do you? In 2021, the NSW, I think New South Wales government, allocated an annual budget of 1.5 million to open a new gender hub for under 25-year-olds. These butchers. The service was to be run by Sydney Children's Hospitals Network and another health partner, but after 2 years and more funding, the service is yet to open. New South Wales Health has told Four Corners it was under development. Referral to Australians' publicly funded gender clinics are ballooning. It's all so familiar, folks, isn't it? Playing out across the West in most countries. Queensland Children's Hospital has more than 600 patients waiting for a first appointment, while the Perth Children's Hospital has more than 150. Unlike other clinics around the country, Westmead Children's Hospital deprioritizes children on its waitlist who are well advanced into puberty or post-puberty. The service also does not provide cross-sex hormones to children, leaving families with the difficult decision of leaving kids on puberty blockers longer or navigating expensive and difficult private pathways to help their children transition. Or, and this is what they've not written, stopping altogether, which is the optimum solution. Renee Wilcox, was desperate to get help for her daughter Brock from Westmead's gender clinic. I'm presuming she's talking about a male. They were so lovely on the phone, but it was very heartbreaking, Rennie said. She said she was told that Brock could go on a waiting list, but that he wouldn't be prioritised. It was because Brock's voice had already broken. So being a 13-year-old, they couldn't help us, Rennie said. Okay. You know that... What's the betting Brock's a gay boy? These conversion therapy wallahs. Puberty was distressing for Brock. The upbeat and extroverted kid became withdrawn and depressed. I hated my body. I hated being a male. I would just cry my eyes out. I couldn't stand seeing myself in the mirror. The cure for that, Brock, is to grow up. To get older. To get laid. That's the cure, Brock. And it comes in time. Another New South Wales health-run clinic, Newcastle's Maple Leaf House, did accept Brock. I broke down and cried. It was such a relief. What have they built up in his mind? What have they built up in this boy's mind, who thinks he's a girl? That he felt relieved that he was about to be placed on a medicalisation pathway that would ruin his life and make wretched his destiny. A psychiatrist diagnosed Brock with gender dysphoria. Of course he did. A psychological distress experienced by those whose gender identity doesn't match their sex assigned at birth. We're into real cult territory now. And he started receiving puberty blockers. Clinicians explained the medication may be associated with reduced bone density. It's not just that, is it? We know that now. Some medical professionals say this approach is too extreme and carries risks. They instead push for what's called watchful waiting, arguing with psychotherapy and the passage of time, many gender issues will resolve. This is strongly refuted by most gender doctors. Well, it would be, wouldn't it? Cut off the grift. Would be, wouldn't it? The medical professionals running Australia's top state-funded gender clinics in Melbourne and Brisbane have told Four Corners the gender-affirming model is a lifesaver and tearing it down will put young people at extreme risk. They're weaponising the suicide lie again. Later this year, Brock wants to start hormones to look more feminine. Daily pills or patches of estrogen would slowly soften her features and develop breasts and hips. They've got a picture there of Brock. Looks to me like he'd probably be a handsome man at some time in his life if they left him alone. Now he'll just end up a butchered walking cadaver. I always get asked, is this something you're sure you want to do? And a lot of, are you sure? Or is it, he's 13, 14, 15, whatever he is, are you sure? And a lot of, are you just checking in, do you still want to do this, Brock said. The amount of times I've had to say, yeah, I want this, I need this badly. I didn't wake up one day and be like, yeah, I'm trans. No, it was years of dysphoria and self-hate. Transgender health expert Jeremy Wiggins, the CEO of Transcend Australia, said the families were told this organisation they don't trust Westmead's Children's Hospital and that they're unable to access the services they need. He said the climate around trans issues in Australia was incredibly hostile and damaging to people who had already a highly marginalised population. The homogenisation of the idea of trans. Yeah, it's just insane. I think families are feeling incredibly distressed. I imagine they are. And I would understand that they would feel that because families want their kids to be safe. Your child is not safe if it is taking puberty blockers, then cross-sex hormones, having its genitals screwed with or removing its breasts. There is nothing safe about that for your child. Nothing. And the adult that your child will become will never forgive you for letting it happen. They're children. You are supposed to be in the way. You're supposed to be in the way of the harm. No matter how distressed, no matter how upset that child is. No matter how upset they are. You're supposed to be in the way of the harm. It's called safeguarding. Clinical psychologist Anna said that distress was exacerbated after third parties started weaponising a report by Westmead. They'd come to me with questions like, did you write the paper? Anna said. There was a lot of distress, a lot of worry. She said senior hospital staff wrote a letter for her to give to any distressed patients. The letter essentially said that we are dedicated and committed to providing a gender-affirming service. That's insane. We are gendered, fully gendered, and we're going to provide affirmation that you are also fully gendered, despite the fact that we've got a report with evidence that said it's iatrogenic. We have the evidence that this harms. So what? We have the evidence this harms. This harms people, because it harms them. You're messing with their bodies on a grand scale, right? With parts of their bodies that were developed over thousands upon thousands of years from an evolutionary perspective to make us the most successful species on Earth. And you're messing with that. Of course it's harmful. So again, the letter essentially said, we are dedicated and committed to providing a gender-affirming service. We are sorry if you're distressed by the results of this paper. We're sorry if you're distressed by the results of this paper. Stop feeling! Start thinking! However, researchers' research and findings have to be published, well said, that individual. The Westman Children's Hospital research focused on a sample of 79 young people who sought help at the hospital's Royal Gender Service. In 2021 peer-reviewed report, researchers identified complex family trauma, here it comes, among those they reviewed with high rates of adverse childhood experience, including family conflict, parental mental illness, and loss of important figures via separation. The researchers said a history of maltreatment was also common, and they said clinicians, including them, were coming under increasing pressure to compromise their own ethical standards by engaging in a tick box treatment process. Male likes Barbie, tick the box, get the cobblers off. Female, likes Action Man, tick box, get the breasts off. They highlighted the risk, this particular report that came out, highlighted the risk of going straight to gender-affirming care and made calls to implement a holistic approach to medical treatment that included a trauma-informed model of mental health care as a component in all gender dysphoric clinics. The Westmead research team published another paper in February last year. It looked at the development pathway choices and clinical outcomes of 79 patients who presented at the hospital. It pointed to an increasing rates of what's known as rapid onset gender dysphoria. You'll be familiar with that term. And if you wish to look into it further, that was a term that was coined by researcher Lisa Littman. This particular rapid onset gender dysphoria very, very prevalent in young girls, young adolescent girls. The absence of a prior history raised questions that this particular group of adolescents were being drawn into the construct of gender dysphoria because of some evolving social process, social contagion. If you look up when anorexia started to fall and look up when gender dysphoria started to rise, guess what you find? Amazing, isn't it? Rapid onset gender dysphoria and the theory it is caused by peer influence and social media are contested concepts. The Australian Psychological Society's position is that empirical evidence refutes the theory. One of the most controversial findings in Westmead's latest research involves the concept of desisters, which often refers to someone who no longer identifies as trans. What you've got to remember is the likelihood is that the Australian Psychological Society, like our own psychological societies over here, is captured. One of the most controversial, captured by gender identity ideologues. One of the most controversial findings is that of desisters. But exactly how desisting is defined varies, including the report which found that gender-related distress was resolved or disappeared for 22% of those who presented at the clinic. The 22% figure included some patients that did not have a formal diagnosis of gender dysphoria and were therefore not eligible for the gender-affirming medical intervention. The finding has been seized upon by critics of gender-affirming care as evident that lots of young people change their minds. It seems so, doesn't it? Mental health expert Ian Hickey believes the data in the Westmead research does not support their conclusions, as the 22% figure includes those who came to the gender clinic but were assessed as not being eligible for puberty blockers. They're dancing around the truth. This particular way this data has been presented is an outlier. Actually, if you go to the data that's in the paper, it's entirely consistent with the opposite conclusion, that it's very rare for actual young people to completely decide to go back to the gender assigned at birth, Professor Hickey said. While the research did separately report on the percentage of patients formerly diagnosed with gender dysphoria that changed their mind about their transition, being 9.1%, Professor Hickey said highlighting the desistance rate as 22% of the broader group has caused unnecessary alarm within the community. What they're saying there is, they're doing a Mott and Bailey, right? So a Mott and Bailey is like, in order to be trans, anybody can be trans. There's the Mott, anybody can be trans, right? Anybody can be trans if you're a cross-dressing 45-year-old bumlicker. Anyone can be trans, right? You can all be trans. Everybody's trans. Have fun, right? And then when everybody goes, hang on, the Bailey is, no, we only mean people with gender dysphoria. So what this person's saying is, we only need to look at the people with gender dysphoria, not the 95% who are LARPing twats. Isn't that what you're saying? You tell me. Clinical and developmental psychologist Emerson Osterberg, who wasn't involved with the research, said there was no path for kids who seek help with gender issues. Yeah, there is. It's called psychoanalysis. It's called reality. That's the path that we give to gender. Kids with gender issues. That's the only path that should be. There are some kids who will go on puberty blockers and then come off it, not because they're not trans, but because the puberty blocker didn't feel right to them, Mr. Osterberg said. Yeah, that's not a tenable argument. NX Osterberg, so it could be a man or a woman, who knows? So you got like. There are some kids who will go on to gender affirming hormones and other kids won't, and that's choice. That's their choice, their personal choice. And that's their personal choice. Not, and that is the clinically indicated thing to do. That's their personal choice, these butchers. There are some kids who will turn into adults. There are some kids who will turn into adults. The language. And will access surgeries, and other people won't want that. There are some kids who, this Oxenberry, whatever it is, Osterberg, Mux Osterberg. That, I've got to say it again because that's just so surreal. There are some kids who will turn into adults. They're talking about it almost like it's, a butterfly from a chrysalis. There are some kids who will turn to, goodness me, it's almost like this entire thing has a fantasy element to it, doesn't it? There are some kids who will turn into adults and will access surgeries, and other people won't want that. The Westmead researchers' final conclusion was that evidence base pertaining to gender-affirming medical pathway is sparse. And for the young people who may regret their choice, the risk for potential harm are significant. None of the research authors could speak on the record to Four Corners. Sydney's Children's Hospital Network said it was required to communicate research results, whether favourable or unfavourable, in ways that permit scrutiny and contribute to public knowledge and understanding. The leaders of the nation's other publicly run gender clinics and a paediatrician currently working on the front line of the Westmead Children's Gender Clinic have written a joint letter contesting some of the findings. This next then says, warning, the following sections includes descriptions of disordered eating and suicide. It's extraordinary that for the first section of this article they were discussing butchering children, and for the second section they're now warning us? These people are mental. Noah O'Brien was another teenager, there's a picture here of Noah, who was desperate for help from Westmead. He began identifying as non-binary at the start of high school, and then mid-later last year, at age 14, he wrote his parents to his letter telling me he identified as a boy. Noah's mum, Lauren, said they thought at first he was being influenced by a friend or someone online. But the longer that time went on, we just saw no, it was definitely just him, who he was. Started identifying non-binary at 14. That's a gay woman. That's a gay woman, I'll put my money on it. And suddenly at 14 they decided non-binary, as if non-binary is a thing. It was around this time that Noah started to restrict his eating quite severely. That's her eating quite severely. So she had anorexia or bulimia or one of these disorders that girls get. But all they did was affirm the fact that she was a boy. Oh, you found your true self. Noah ended up at Westmead Children's Hospital. She was discharged the next day with the recommendation that he or she seek support for gender issues. His mum went to the GP to get a referral for the hospital's gender clinic. It was sent to the hospital last October, but Noah's family wasn't told that at Westmead he or she would be pushed away down the waiting list because he or she had begun puberty. Lauren rang places, went to the doctors, tried everywhere to get help, but it was just like doors were closing in her face. Nobody was responding to her call for help Noah's grandmother, Rose Marsh, said. When Noah was admitted to the eating disorder unit to be treated for anorexia, the gender unit staff decided they should try to see him. Four Corners has learnt that a social worker from the gender services visited Noah. An email shows how the visit unfolded. I met with Noah and provided her with community support information. He also mentioned that his cycles were causing distress. His cycles. So I wondered if menstrual management could be discussed with him. Menstrual management could be discussed with him. They went in to a child and started treating that child like the delusion they were, so that they could distance themselves from the menstruation, which on distancing themselves because they were being supported by adults that told them they were what they wanted, it would have made the situation worse. These aren't the smartest people in town, are they? And the story of Noah is a terribly sad one. He also mentioned that his cycles were causing distress, so I wondered if menstrual management could be discussed with him. The social worker wrote to a superior. The discussion didn't go ahead. A senior staff member outside the gender clinic told the social worker she needed to cease involvement with Noah due to the eating disorder being the primary focus. Hallelujah! Somebody who knew what they were talking about. Noah was effectively denied any specialist gender support by the hospital. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Gender issues with gender are not a problem. They are a symptom of a larger problem. In this case, the larger problem being anorexia, the first thing to deal with, a murderous and dreadful condition. As the summer holidays drew to a close, Noah was anxious about returning to school. It would be the first time he'd worn a boy's uniform. Noah took his own life. I feel like he didn't get any help or support in making that transition to become a male, Rose said. That's his grandmother, pretending that her dead granddaughter was male. We did all we could. Lauren did more than anyone else ever could, but we just didn't get any help from anywhere that could help us, these poor, desperate parents. Westmead Children's Hospital management declined to speak to Four Corners, issuing a statement expressing their sincere condolences to Noah's family. Due to patient privacy and confidentiality, Sydney Children's Hospital Network is unable to provide further information about his specific care. Globally, access to gender-affirming care for children has been shifting rapidly. The UK's National Health Service will close its gender identity clinic and replace it with regional hubs after it was criticised in an independent review. At least 20 states in the US have now banned or restricted gender-affirming care. Puberty blockers have been wound back in European countries like Norway, Sweden and Finland, and are only to be used in clinical trials in the UK. In Australia, there are increasing calls to limit or review gender-affirming care for people like Dr. Gillian Spencer. The psychiatrist has been stood down from clinic duties at Queensland's Children's Hospital, pending investigation into a complaint from a transgender patient. She's contesting the allegation and has lodged a complaint with the Queensland Human Rights Commission, saying she should have a right as a doctor to object to the affirmation model for children. Yes, you don't only have a right, you have a moral duty, as do the rest of us. Dr. Spencer instead supports the watchful waiting model. This would involve engaging with them, treating mental health comorbidities, and engaging them in therapy and family therapy if need be, optimising their school functioning, engagement, and trying to get them connected to peers and activities that help them to feel good about who they are. Yeah, like caring for a child. Psychologist Diane Kenny is a member of a group that backs research into alternatives to gender-affirming care and is an ambassador for lobby group Binary Australia. These people are nuts. I don't care. Keep using this nonsense. She provides gender exploratory therapy. It is not conversion therapy. It provides a safe exploratory space for children to look at themselves and to gain about greater understanding, Dr. Kenny said. Are they swinging between the two extremes here? The right, conversion therapy, which we know what that is. Two genders. And the left conversion therapy, which of course is gender affirmation model, the gender affirmation care. The aim of the therapy that I practice is for the young person to know their true feelings and to express them, whatever they turn out to be. Professor Hickey said there was no evidence that psychological therapy alone is a legitimate alternative to what is being offered through most specialist gender clinics. Exploratory psychology therapists, family therapists, watchful waiting are not evidence-based. They are a set of intrinsic beliefs of different professional groups, he said. People who detransition, decide to go back to the gender assigned to them at birth, are increasingly part of the ammunition against gender-affirming care. That's because the whole thing's a nonsense. People as young as 18, 19, early 20s are warning their young peers, don't make the mistake that I've made, Dr. Kenny said, adding there was no good data on the number of people who detransition. Sam Winter said it was fair criticism of the gender-affirming healthcare model that researchers have not given sufficient attention to detransitioners or also those who desist. We haven't given enough attention to those who come out of the process with regret. Dr. Stephen Stathis is Medical Director of Child and Youth Mental Health Service at Children's Health Queensland. He said about 80% of the research on gender-affirming care had been published in the past 10 years. The evidence base is emerging and it's changing, and so we're constantly reviewing the evidence base and adapting our model of care to take into consideration the new evidence. Watch Four Corners full interview investigation on ABC iView. So this is taking place in Australia. Just got to end it all. Just got to end it all. There's nothing about this good. It's wickedness. Wickedness. Okay, so there you go. Thank you to the warrior teacher that sent me that. I think it's something that people are worth looking at. We're seeing that stuff unfold in Australia. We've seen it elsewhere, including in the UK. And we've seen it unfold in Finland and Sweden. We're now seeing it unfold in Australia. A moratorium, a cease, a global moratorium which means that anything to do with gender affirming care ceases. That's what we need to do. I'll see you later.